Hello. All right. Peppermints in the Parlor is getting so good. So grab your peppermints, possibly your tea, and we're going to read the next chapter, which is chapter 4. We did chapter 3 online. So yeah. Anyway, chapter 4, a disturbing explanation. Once in her cellar room, Emily collapsed onto her cot and stared at the tiny sliver high up in the wall that was to be her only window. Forever, she wondered. She was too weary to unpack her traveling bag and take out her nightdress. She was even too weary to pull off her clothes. She didn't think of a bone in her body that did not ache, and she felt so empty, though not really hungry. How could she ever be hungry for the ugly food in that ugly kitchen? Suddenly, she began to shiver so hard she could not stop. She was cold and tired, but more than that, she began to remember all that had happened to her. Especially where she was now, in the small, dank room of stone deep in the ground, with horror overhead and horror just outside the door, the remembrance room, with its sighing, moaning inhabitant. What kind of evil mind could invent such a cruel punishment for a sad old person who had done nothing more than take a peppermint? Though still in her dress, Emily was now throwing herself under the bedclothes to pull them up over her head to hide the terrors of the room. Then suddenly she heard a faint knock at the door. "Who is it?" she asked. "Aunt Twice," came the reply. Aunt Twice! Emily ran to the door and threw it open. Silent as a shadow, Aunt Twice slipped in, carefully closing the door behind her. Then, without another word, she took Emily in her arms. "Oh, Aunt Twice," Emily sobbed, "I thought you would never come." "My poor darling child," Aunt Twice said, "what a cruel life you've come to. But you are being brave, and I am much so proud of you. Still, you must continue to remember, much as I wish it were not so, that this house and its owner," Aunt Twice shuddered, "must come first. They must come before everything." "I will remember," Emily promised. "But, oh, Aunt Twice, who are all the old people? Why are they here?" "They are the people no one wants," Aunt Twice replied gently. "Their families can no longer look after them, or sadly and cruelly no longer want them. This is an old people's home that you've come to, Emily." "Are all old people's homes like this? Must they all come to such a place?" Emily asked. "No, Emily. There are pleasant, kind homes, but this is not one of them. This is an evil place, wicked and evil. It is only the uncaring who leave their old people here." "Oh, Aunt Twice," Emily cried, "can nothing be done about them?" "Nothing," said Aunt Twice with tight lips. Emily shuddered. It was such a mournful dinner time. Why can't they share some of that beautiful food in the big ice box? Aunt Twice stiffened. "You must not ask questions about the food, Emily. I know how terrible the food is for them and for you too, but you must never touch any of the other. Even if you think no one is watching, everything here is numbered. Everything is accounted for." The last thing Tilly had said, Emily thought, but her aunt had told her that she was to ask no more questions about food, so there was nothing more to say about it. At any rate, another pressing question had jumped into her mind. "But Aunt Twice, you're not an old person. Why are you here?" "Because I am a prisoner," replied Aunt Twice simply. "A prisoner? But you came to meet me at the train station," Emily said, "and you aren't in chains." Aunt Twice smiled a grim smile. "There are other ways of being a prisoner, Emily. Someone's very life depends on me serving the owner of Sugar Hill Hall." "Someone's very life? Who?" Emily breathed. Aunt Twice hesitated. I cannot tell you. I cannot." "But Aunt Twice," Emily blurted out, "can't Uncle Twice come to help you? Where is he?" Aunt Twice's face turned ashen. "Hush, child, hush!" Her eyes darted around the small room as if pursued by some deadly horror. "The walls here have ears and eyes. You must never speak of him, never. You must think of him as dead. Will you promise that?" think of Uncle Twice as dead? Did that mean he was really alive? Questions tumbled wildly in Emily's head, but Aunt Twice had said she must never speak of him again, and had asked for her to promise. Numbly, Emily nodded her head. Aunt Twice looked as though she might be saying something more. Her mouth opened suddenly, but then, just as suddenly, snapped shut, and Emily knew that it was locked upon its secret terrors as tightly as the door of the remembrance room. If she ever was going to find any answers to her questions, it would have to be on her own. After a moment, the frozen expression on Aunt Twice's face softened into a sad, dim smile. She reached out to stroke Emily's head gently. Oh, these beautiful and golden braids. Well, at least we can trim what is left so you won't look like a straggly little waif. She dipped her hand into the pocket of her brown calico dress and pulled out a pair of scissors. A short while later, after a snip here and a snip there, Emily looked at herself in the cracked mirror. Although far from beautiful, the haircut was certainly an improvement over the one provided earlier. Emily managed a smile at her reflection to please Aunt Twice. You poor, tired child, not even in your nightdress yet, Aunt Twice said, and you haven't unpacked your traveling bag. I thought you might have done so when you came down with Tilly. I wasn't certain I should, Emily stammered. But why not? Asked Aunt Twice. Because there's something in it I'm certain Tilly should not see. She pulled the gold chain from her dress and quickly hooked the key, hoping that Aunt Twice would not notice the locket. If she did, and saw the picture of herself and Uncle Twice, she would most certainly want the picture destroyed. But with all interest in the key, she seemed not to notice the locket. Emily unlocked her traveling bag and reached into a tiny secret compartment in the silk lining. From it, she pulled out a small white paper packet. Then she opened the packet and poured its contents into Aunt Twice's hand. 20 pure gold coins. Papa's lawyer, Mr. Dowling, gave them to me before I left, Emily explained. I suspect he thought I might need the money before my allowance would start coming in from you and Papa's will. Oh, dear child, Aunt Twice cried. Don't you know? Your Papa died a pauper. He lost everything in the sudden failure of his company. Mr. Darling wrote, there is no money coming. No money coming? Emily said confused. Then where did Mr. Dowling get the gold coins? I would guess from his own pocket, murmured Aunt Twice. But with all expectations now ended, there is even greater reason for these gold coins to be protected. You were right not to show them to Tilly. But where can you keep them? My room is not safe. Her eyes searched the room swiftly. Then at last she gave a small cry of triumph. Lifting up a corner of the thin mattress on the cot, she made a tiny slit at the seam of ticking with her scissors. One by one, she slipped the coins through. Then with a needle and thread she found in her pocket, she stitched up the opening with trembling fingers. She had no sooner finished this task, however, than a sound of merely more than a whisper of air outside the door made her jerk up and her head stiffen. For a moment she stood with staring eyes, motionless as a mouse accustomed to the soft secret approach. Oh, sorry. Then with a finger crept to her lips as a signal for Emily to be silent. She crept slowly to the door and flung it open. Tilly, what are you doing? For all its sternness, Aunt Twice's voice was quivering. I just wondered what you were doing, whined Tilly. You never come to talk to me at night. Aunt Twice sighed. I didn't know you wanted me to, Tilly, and we are ordinarily both so weary at night. But I have not seen my niece in years, so I wished her to talk about her dear departed mother and father. You never talks to me about my dear departed ma and pa, said Tilly, pouting. Leastways, my departed pa. My mom just upped and died. Tilly, said Aunt Twice patiently, your mother died when you were born, and your father left soon after, but that was years and years ago. Emily only just lost her mother and father in a terrible accident. I doesn't care, said Tilly stubbornly. I wants to talk about 'em. Us orphings is supposed to be equals. I heard Miss Meaching say so. If you talks about her ma and pa, you's have to talk about mine, too. Aunt Toy stiffened at the mention of Miss Meaching's name. When do you want to talk about them, Tilly? Right now. It's very late, Aunt Toy said. Wouldn't tomorrow night do just as well? Tilly thought this over. Well, as long as you don't forget. Hey, ain't that Emily's bag open? She promised how she'd allow me to see her pretty things. I'm only taking out my nightdress now, Tilly, Emily said. She remembered that her tam o' shanter was still stuck in Tilly's apron pocket where, for all she knew, it had taken up permanent residence. We can look at them tomorrow. I promise we will. There was more thought from Tilly. Well, long as he promises. I guess 'tis late. Yes, of course it is, Aunt Toy said quickly. That's a sensible girl, Tilly. Now come along and we'll go together to our rooms. Good night, Emily. She closed the door without so much as a backward look. They had talked about Mama and Papa, but Emily already had come to accept the way Aunt Twice must behave now, so she was not startled by being left so suddenly. Still, this did not make it any easier to be left alone, once again, in her cold, stony, silent underground cell. Silent, that is, except for strange scratching sounds overhead. Rats, she wondered. Quickly, she threw off her clothes and slipped into her nightdress. Before she turned down the gaslight, however, she opened her locket to study the photographs inside it. Shadows danced eerily over the tiny figures. Mama, Papa, Aunt Twice, Uncle Twice, tall and slender Uncle Twice, with the golden mustaches and the twinkling blue eyes. As Mama and Papa was a photograph all Emily could do to remember him by. Shivering, she finally turned down the light and jumped into her cot, pulled the skimpy coverlet tight around her face. She hoped she could fall asleep at once, yet no sooner would she close her eyes than terrifying shapes danced across her eyelids, making them fly open. As she stared into the darkness, questions began to whirl through her head. She thought of the mountains of delicious food in the locked icebox. Surely 2 ladies, even with the most enormous appetites, could not consume so much food. Everything numbered, everything accounted for. So surely nothing would be tossed away either. Who did eat it then? But one of the burning questions that returned over and over had to do with Uncle Twice. She had thought of him as dead. Why? Could he be the one whose life depended on Aunt Twice serving the dread Mrs. Meaching? Or was the life of Aunt Twice so desperately protected, one Emily as yet knew nothing about, so she was to think of her uncle as dead because he had become as evil as this mansion? Because he was the depraved mind behind all this horror, and not Mrs. Meaching? Well, after all, he had bought Sugar Hill Hall, hadn't he? Wasn't he the owner? Emily tried to sweep these ugly thoughts from her mind, but they stuck firm and would not be swept away. Of one terrible thing, however, she was becoming certain. There were terrible secrets locked up in Sugar Hill Hall. And somehow she had the feeling that the key to all of them lay with Uncle Twice. But where was he? Would she find out? Whom should she ask? Not Aunt Twice, she knew. Her aunt was much too frightened to reveal anything, holding a life in her hands. Tilly, then? She probably knew little about what she did already know. She would not likely tell Emily. So whatever Emily discovered, she would have to manage on her own. How she could possibly discover anything, she had no idea. It would take all her strength and wits just to keep from becoming another shadow like the old people. But she would not become one, she told herself fiercely. Nor would she ever let Mrs. Meaching see tears in her eyes. Never. But all this bravery would have to start tomorrow. Tonight she was a cold, lonely, frightened girl, away from the only home she had ever known. She had lost her Mama and Papa, and there was nothing to look forward to but gray soup and moldy bread, and odd Tilly for her only friend. The sounds of her tears and sobbing when they came were deeply buried in her small, hard pillow, because she had not forgotten, even in all her misery, that the walls had eyes and ears. All right, we will read chapter 5 probably next week, and it is called Kipper. And Kipper is my absolute favorite character, so I hope that you guys enjoy it. I will talk to you soon. Bye.